We have something special for Self-Work listeners today, courtesy of our friends at the podcast How To with Mike Pesca. For those new to the show, How To is the long-standing series recently nominated for the Best Personal Growth Podcast at the 2026 Ambie Awards. Each week on How To, journalist Mike Pesca tackles a listener's question on topics ranging from travel and finance to health and relationships. He does it with help from world-class experts who actually know what they're talking about. Think of it as eavesdropping on someone else's therapy session without the copay or awkward silence. Today, we're sharing their recent episode, How to Take Psychedelics for Your Mental Health, where Mike interviews pioneering psychiatrist and psychedelic researcher Dr. Will Derveer. I love this episode because you get to hear a variety of personal experiences of medical psychedelics and learn more about this emerging treatment for mental health conditions. So if you enjoy today's episode, be sure to follow How To on your favorite podcast app for even more. And tell them Self-Work sent you. All right, here's the episode.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Hi, I'm Chandler Garcia. As a PICU nurse and global health advocate, I've cared for women and children all over the world, from Costa Rica to Egypt to Kenya and beyond. And no matter where I go or how tough the conditions get, I always wear my figs. These scrubs are lightweight, breathable, and super soft, perfect for long shifts in any environment. They've got pockets in all the right places, the fit is flexible, and they're durable through every admission, surgery, and post-op. But it's not just about the scrubs. Another big part of what I love about figs is when they say they're committed to supporting healthcare workers all over the world, they mean it. I recently joined them on an impact trip to India where I worked in triage, caring for babies in a mobile clinic. My figs aren't just what I wear. They're part of the impact I want to make. Wherever my work takes me, Figs helps me show up ready to make a difference while looking and feeling my best. Get 15% off your first order at wearfigs.com with code FIGSRX. That's wearfigs.com, code FIGSRX.
I tend to think about ketamine like a tow truck getting you out of a ditch, but you're not going to want to ride around town on the back of a tow truck for the rest of your life.
Welcome to How To. I'm Mike Pesca. Picture yourself on a boat on a river where all your childhood trauma melts into marshmallow pies. Somebody calls you. It's your monkey brain, rudely, but now all fades into smiles. All right, that intro did a lot. It was a bad Beatles cover. It was a hoary description of a psychedelic trip, but all I can access, I have to admit, a naive depiction of how psychedelics might help heal the mind or metabolize old trauma. But I want to know more. This is such a new and I think promising area of growth and therapy. I bet you know, like I know, so many people who are interested in using psychedelics as therapy, or maybe who are doing it themselves. And some of these people are funny. Some are vegan, some are Buddhist, some are Jewish, some are from New Jersey. But we needed a person who was all of that.
I am Myq Kaplan. I am a stand-up comedian. I am a human being, and I am someone curious about psychedelic therapy.
So, Myq, how are you?
I'm well, thanks for having me. Always happy to chat with you.
Isn't that the correct question that one asks in therapy?
Oh, how are you? I think that's a big
doing?
one. I'm no therapist myself, but I did study psychology in my undergrad life, and that was covered in our first class, and the only thing I remember. Yeah.
What drew you to psychology?
I double majored in philosophy and psychology. I didn't know going in that I wanted to, but I think the brain it's one of the more fascinating parts of the body. And so, I guess I had questions like why and how, and even how to. So early on, I was preparing for this very moment. But, I was taking a variety of classes, and I had some good teachers and wanted to learn about how people work, because I don't know if I mentioned this, but I'm a person.
Yeah, the human thing. So as your life journey takes you to all the interesting places it does, are you just thinking about thinking, or is your thinking about thinking taking on some other thoughts that you'd like to address, I don't know, chemically?
Sure. I didn't do any quote unquote mind altering substances until I was an adult. I was sort of raised with very sheltering, loving Jewish parents who were like, don't drink, don't smoke, don't do drugs. Until I did start thinking a little more for myself, and I learned that drugs, is an umbrella term that covers, among other things, weed and heroin. And I did a little of my own research. I'm no scientist, but I saw from some empirical data that existed and anecdotal experiences of, I didn't know anyone on heroin, but I knew a lot of people who did weed and didn't die, and in fact even got some benefit from it. And I didn't. I was about 25 when I smoked weed for the first time, and it wasn't my favorite thing. But then I was performing at a music festival off the coast of Rhode Island on Block Island sometime around that time as well. And I sold a CD afterwards, and somebody paid me with a $10 bill wrapped around a psilocybin mushroom stem. And I said, "Is this what I think it is?" And he said, yes.
Yes,
I
it's
said,
a $10 bill.
Yeah.
And then you said,
that's Alexander Hamilton right there, smiling at you. And he had more, and I had my first, recreational trip at that point, and it was very eye-opening, mind-opening, heart-opening. And at that point, there were no therapists present, but it was just a beautiful thing that led me to want to do it again. And so over probably the next decade or two, I would have my own and with friends experiences, some of which I think, were just purely laughter based, and some which delved deeper until probably in my 30s, I did an ayahuasca ceremony for the first time. And so over the past decade and a half, I have probably done dozens of ayahuasca ceremonies, either in the jungles or mountains of Peru or in the meditation studios of Brooklyn. Not officially, not certified, but personally speaking, a therapeutic experience among other things.
I did want to ask you about this. Was there a need for therapy, or did you begin to think because you had some experiences with mushrooms that this could have a therapeutic application, but you weren't seeking other forms of therapy at the time?
Sure. Good question. I, in my life since childhood, have probably gone to therapy at 4 different junctures, like starting when my parents were getting divorced. I went to their couples counseling once. I went in college a little bit when I had good health insurance through having been on television for enough during 1 year. I was like, I can go to therapy for basically free. And then I did online therapy. Like, it's often been like need-based. If I had like a particular inciting incident that I'm like, I want to discuss this. I do think that it would be beneficial for society to have it be more cost-friendly and available to the way health insurance pays for a yearly physical. Like, why not a weekly mental? I feel like that would be preventative of many of society's ills and personal ills. So I have been on my own therapeutic journey outside of psychedelic use, and I've been on various psychedelic journeys that lean therapeutic or therapeut-ish at times, but I have not personally crossed the streams as yet.
What is the need that you think that psychedelics could address, or that you are at least curious about psychedelics addressing?
Personally, my dream of therapy, I had this idea that I would go and I would tell them everything that I was thinking and feeling and all the details of my life for them to say, that sounds about right. You're fine. What's funny is when I did the BetterHelp therapy, which was maybe a couple years ago, I had a therapist who had the same first name as my mother, which I don't think should be allowed. And I did basically share all of what I was experiencing. And at the end of that first session, she said, well, I think you are okay, which I don't know if that's technically what's supposed to happen. But, I was like, my dream.
It's not smart for business. I know that.
But I was like, well, I paid for a month, so we're gonna figure something out. And so I guess just personally speaking, like, I think I've had times in my life when I was angrier. I've had times in my life when I was more scared, and so those are the main things that I look for in therapy and that I have gotten from some psychedelic experiences, I think by design. I think it was a feature, not a bug, but never directed by a practitioner of therapy. So that is something that I'm curious about.
Mm-hmm. Is there something that needs healing? Do you have, and maybe you do, but you don't mention it because you just think it's part of the human condition, anxiety or a brain that won't shut off, or a lot of the things that correlate actually to being a pretty good comedian?
If I were to be diagnosed with something, I think it could be OCD. But yeah, I exist somewhere on the anxious, obsessive end of the spectrum. And yes, the answer is yes.
Do you have any worries? Do you have any misgivings about what such therapy might entail or produce in you?
I guess I want something solid, but I continually learn that there's, I think, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche said, the bad news is we're hurtling through space with no parachute. The good news is there is no ground. And so I think
the other good news is there is no gravity in space, so a parachute wouldn't do shit. But the bad news is there's no oxygen. So it's
yes. Oh, yeah. And
a lot of good news, bad news. Yeah.
But it's all to say my goal is, sort of continuing to gain more comfort with discomfort, as it might be. The first arrow that everyone gets shot with in the Buddhist analogy, which is, the pains that life offers that cannot be avoided. And so I'm just looking to avoid as many second, third, and fourth arrows as possible. Can you do that?
I can. Well, I can't. But I know a guy who might be able to. And in just a snap of a finger, we unite Myq Kaplan with a doctor and expert in therapeutic psychedelics. Stick around.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
The best trips are the ones you share. So get the whole family together to hike the trails, walk alongside dinosaurs, enjoy thrill rides at Dollywood, relax at a spa, and cheer for dinner shows, all in Pigeon Forge. Just visit the Great Smoky Mountains for incredible adventures and unforgettable memories that everyone will want to be a part of. Join the fun and plan your spring trip today at mypigeonforge.com.
Hollywood feed delivery. 500 squeaky balls for bingo?
Bingo? What did you do?
Oh, and there's more. 1 XL memory foam dog bed, 75 bully sticks, and a mountain of toys still in the car.
Bingo, did you really order online from Hollywood Feed again?
From tasty treats to tail-wagging toys, get everything your pet loves delivered same day. Check your address and order now at HollywoodFeed.com. Hollywood Feed. More wagging, less waiting.
Hello and welcome back to How To. Before the break, we heard from Myq Kaplan, comedian, philosopher, dabbler in ayahuasca, experiencer of plant medicines, and mushrooms given as partial payment for a CD. Remember CDs? Myq is open to opening his mind some more. Is that a good reason to take some psychedelics? And if so, what kind of psychedelics? Luckily, we have a shaman of our own standing by.
I'm Dr. Will Derveer. I've been a psychiatrist for about 25 years. I got pretty dissatisfied with psychiatry and went looking for better answers, which landed me in the work of psychedelic therapy.
So from what you heard from Myq, I don't know if we violated any sort of podcaster or client privilege by letting you in on that. Do you hear that sort of interest a lot from people who might be coming to you saying, is this sort of therapy right for me?
Well, there's definitely a range of severity of what brings people to psychedelic therapy. And what Myq was describing, I would say, is on the milder end of the spectrum. I wouldn't say what his BetterHelp therapist said, that there's nothing to talk about here. I think there's plenty to talk about. And, I totally agree with what Myq was saying about the human condition and the suffering of change. It's something that I think is naturally sort of hardwired into human nature, that we are looking for a place to stand, like an iceberg or, some kind of solid ground, but the thing is always melting under our feet, as he described. So that is a constant source of disturbance. And so how we relate to the disturbance of being a human being is really important to mental health. And so there's a concept that we've learned from psychedelic therapy research that comes from watching how electrical patterns in the brain function before, during, and after psychedelic therapy. And what we see is that the very strong attachment to having things be the way they are, including who I am, like my attachment to my identity, my attachment to my reality, to my way of life, as tight as that can be, psychedelic therapy can open that up for a period of time where people can feel the fresh air coming into their mind of, well, wait, maybe there's different ways to look at life. There's different ways to live. And
can I ask you, is that an analogy or is that a physical change?
The observation by functional MRI is a physical change. It's been described as shaking the snow globe. So you got a certain vision of like what's inside that snow globe, and then you shake it up and things look different afterwards. So then the question becomes, how tight or how loose is this person coming into psychedelic therapy? And Mike presented a great example of what I think is more the common pattern in American life today, which is there's a lot more changing than there ever has been. There's a lot less that we can count on. And so there's more anxiety.
Right.
And so within that anxiety, the human thing is to tighten down and clamp down. But what the promise of psychedelic therapy for someone like Mike on the mild end of the spectrum is that you could have this approach to life loosen up and become more relaxed. And the researchers call this psychological flexibility, the ability to face life's challenges, or as Mike was talking about, the different types of suffering that the Buddha talked about, with more equanimity, more poise, more relaxation, less fear, less clamping down. Now, most people come to psychedelic therapy for the more severe end of the spectrum of what they're dealing with. So we could also talk about that.
Yeah, we are using, and maybe you were taking the cues from me, as I believe a good therapist would, talking about broadly psychedelics. But there's ketamine, there's MDMA. Are those the same thing? How do they work? And how robust are the findings that they do work?
So the three main chemicals we should be talking about, the one Mike mentioned, psilocybin, coming from mushrooms, which is currently only available in Oregon and Colorado, by the way. Everywhere else, it's illegal.
Peru.
Right, exactly. Outside the U.S. Ketamine, which is on DEA Schedule 3, meaning it's considered to be about as safe as Valium or a benzodiazepine category medicine. Controlled substance, but relatively safe and well-established. And then the third one is MDMA, which is not legal in any country at the moment.
Okay, let's start with ketamine.
So the work with ketamine, which is probably the place to start, widely available, legal in all states, has very robust evidence to support its use in depression, primarily. There are some studies on treating PTSD and even obsessive compulsive disorder with ketamine, but 95% of the research is on depression. It has dramatic benefits for depression that happen pretty quickly for the people it benefits. Like anything, it doesn't work for everyone, but it has, in the research showing its effectiveness for depression, it causes about a 50% reduction in symptoms in about 70% of people within the first 24 hours. So that's pretty substantial impact. The trouble with ketamine is that the benefits often wear off relatively quickly. And for someone like me, my goal is to get people through psychiatry and put it behind them as quickly as possible. I'm not interested in having people limp along and get sort of a partial benefit. Putting people into maintenance ketamine treatment, to me, is sort of the opposite of what I'm looking for in a psychedelic therapy, where I want to do an intervention that's short term.
Do you have to keep upping the dose to get the same effect?
In some cases, yes, with ketamine. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And now tell me about MDMA. What's promising about that? Why isn't it on the market yet?
MDMA went all the way up to the end of phase 3 in 2024. It got denied by the FDA on the basis of a few details that didn't get done in the phase 3 study.
Yes.
There is still hope that it could be approved. So it stumbled at the end of phase 3, unfortunately. But the effectiveness and the safety profile of the drug were well established by those studies. There's just a few more details that need to be collected.
Yes, I read about this, that the studies were lacking. And also that people in the community who were eager for MDMA to be approved find fault with how the studies were done.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the problems in the way those studies were done was it was presented to FDA as a psychotherapy that was supported by MDMA rather than, hey, let's study MDMA and let's have a person in the room who can protect the experience of the participant. FDA doesn't know how to evaluate that kind of new drug application where the therapy is primary and the drug is secondary. So I think that created problems.
Right.
And a number of the opinions of the experts that the FDA hired reflected that those experts, so-called experts, didn't know anything about psychedelic therapy. And there was even one expert on the panel who said, I don't understand why we're even talking about this. We already have effective treatments for PTSD. And when I look around, I see 10 million people in America with PTSD and 22 veterans a day killing themselves. I don't agree with that opinion.
Yeah. Mike, have you ever, and will caveat this by saying you tour the country. I'm speaking only hypothetically of Oregon and Colorado. But have you had any experience with ketamine?
I one time had an experience with ketamine somewhere where it was totally legal to do it with a certified comedian friend. And
with a fish t-shirt, yes.
Yeah, ketamine is something that, I feel like I've had numerous experiences on other psychedelic substances such that, the first time I did ayahuasca, the guide said to me, have you done this before? And I said no. And he said, have you done mushrooms? And I said yes. And he said, good. It's very different. But it, sort of, at least there's a category of if you've eaten food, you're like, I know how food works, even if I've never tasted this flavor of food. And so there's these different flavors of psychedelics, but ketamine, my experience with it was a wholly different. I would have to have more experiences with it to sort of triangulate to be like, was this an outlier? They all make my body feel different. They all make my mind and consciousness do something different. But I do have one other quick question for you, doctor. When you're a therapist, in general, you probably have some experiences going to therapy before you practice on others. Like before you started doling out ketamine, was it part of the process where you experience it yourself?
Yeah, it was. It was a training that I went to in 2017 for ketamine in particular, that when I was given ketamine, I didn't know the dosing range as intimately as I now do, but at the time, the person who was running that training gave me a very high dose of ketamine, and it was a very challenging after experience. It's a long story, but it opened up something in my psyche that needed a lot of healing, and it took a while for that to come back together. But in the end, it was really useful and really productive to have that experience.
I want to be clear. It opened up something that needed healing in a good way, or it caused you a wound? Which are you saying?
That's a great question. I think the difference between interpreting something as a wound or something that needs to be healed depends on how the process goes of working with it, maybe. I had the resources to work with that, and it was an early childhood experience of abandonment, and also it was mixed in with this kind of spiritual moment of what felt like to me in the moment of like my soul coming into my body, but right before birth. And I somehow knew how painful my childhood was about to be. And I was just, as I was coming back into my body off the ketamine, I was shouting no at the top of my lungs because I didn't want to face the pain that I knew was in front of me. So I don't know if you call that a wound or an opportunity, but for me, it ultimately felt like an opportunity.
I guess it depends on, let's posit that there's something called reality, how actually traumatizing your childhood was, as opposed to, injecting into your consciousness this perception that there was all this great pain.
Right. It's all relative, right? When you're coming up in your childhood and things are happening, you don't know that there's a different setting in a different home, not so much, right? You're dealing with what you're dealing with. I had a parent who was a substance addict who went to prison and almost bankrupted the family, and there were gangsters showing up, knocking on the front door, looking for this person, threatening to kill him, and so on. So at the time, growing up in that environment, I thought that was pretty normal. I didn't know any different. But it took a lot of therapy for me to actually acknowledge that I was in terror a lot as a child.
Yeah. I'm gonna call that real trauma. Let me consult with my colleague here. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I also just want to hang a lantern on. I like the sentence. Let's posit that there is something called reality.
Well, you're a Buddhist, of course you would.
we'll revisit that, but I do think also what we're experiencing as real. Like, we all have childhoods, and if you could learn about everyone's experience and then be like, okay, what's average, what's common, what's anomalous. But I guess just want to make it clear, it seems like the ketamine experience you had didn't create the pain that you felt. It more was like a black light illuminating something that was there that you had been like living with and dealing with, but not addressing as full on.
And Mike, is there something there that you identify with?
Here's just a very simple memory from recent years. My girlfriend loves fragrance, and she has given me some, and so I wear them sometime. My mom, one time when I came to her home and embraced her, smelled the fragrance, which was like I'd never been wearing fragrance around her before because I'd never really been wearing it. And she was particularly sensitive to it. And she said, you can't do that. And I was like, oh, I mean, I didn't realize. And so just that phrasing was particularly noteworthy and sort of echoes things that she has said other times. Like, when she's had an experience that was unpleasant, she'll sometimes say, like, you don't do that. I love my mother. I have a good relationship with my mother. Like, I certainly don't have anything as objectively, quote unquote, objectively traumatic as scary people showing up to my home. You know, my things are a lot more internal than, externally, aside from, the world.
So, Dr. Van Derveer, other than the fact that we're wired to headphones and talking into cameras and microphones, this sort of thing must happen to you all the time. Someone comes to you, says, I have these issues or thoughts. They're somewhat contradictory. They're somewhat swirling around. I'm open to the idea of, now that ketamine's on the market, maybe something else. And then they're essentially saying to you, because what I hear Mike is saying, something like, would you tell me to do ketamine, or would it be okay if I did ketamine? So how might you deal with a person who was presenting this to you, as I'm sure many have?
Right. Well, there's a whole process of evaluating the risks and benefits and talking about alternatives and, what someone tried already. What is their readiness for change in their life? I mean, to me, I mentioned that ketamine wears off quickly for people and then they end up on maintenance treatment. My goal is to identify things that we can change and address that will help that person stay well after the ketamine helps them. I tend to think about ketamine like a tow truck getting you out of a ditch, but you're not going to want to ride around town on the back of a tow truck for the rest of your life. You know, you want to get back behind the wheel. And to do that, you've got to cover the basics. And most people who are dealing with chronic problems that I see, like depression or PTSD, their diet's a mess, their sleep's a mess, their relationships are a mess. They might be sitting on the couch too depressed to get up and go anywhere. So there's a lot that we have to deal with in terms of just lifestyle and basic functional things that you can't really be well without, So that's part of the assessment. And then the other thing is, and there's news, last week, we're recording here toward the end of February, there's movement toward the end of phase 3 for psilocybin as a potentially FDA-approved product. It's possible that could get approved by the end of the year. I think psilocybin is going to take away much of the use of ketamine for depression because the evidence is showing that 1 or 2 sessions can keep you well for 6 to 12 months, or maybe longer. In some cases, people have a permanent benefit from that.
So maybe we'll look back at ketamine like we looked at, I don't know, you come up with the right analogy. Is Valium not used anymore? Some drug that was a stepping stone, a Band-Aid, or just not very effective?
Yeah, the only exception to that is ketamine has this ability to cut through suicidal thinking very quickly. So I think it might be used in emergency rooms to help people not get hospitalized who in the past would have been hospitalized.
Wow.
But outside of that, as long as the cost proposition is similar to ketamine, I think people are going to go for psilocybin. And if it's approved on a federal level, then hopefully, of course, insurance would be taking care of that and the VA would adopt it and so on.
All right. In a moment, we'll be back to see if Myq Kaplan, the junkyard dog, could hop on the back of that tow truck or possibly get behind the driver's seat, or if the analogies can be so tortured that there's some psychopharmaceutical intervention that we could save. Back in a minute with more of How To.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Hollywood feed delivery. 500 squeaky balls for bingo?
Bingo, what did you do?
Oh, and there's more. 1 XL memory foam dog bed, 75 bully sticks, and a mountain of toys still in the car.
Bingo, did you really order online from Hollywood Feed again?
From tasty treats to tail-wagging toys, get everything your pet loves delivered same day. Check your address and order now at HollywoodFeed.com. Hollywood Feed. More wagging, less waiting.
We're back with Dr. Will Vanderveer and Myq Kaplan talking about ketamine, psilocybin, and maybe the odd ayahuasca trip as therapeutics. Dr. Vanderveer, I know you are the co-founder of the Integrative Clinic, and I have been to the site there. You talk about the necessity of addressing root causes from sleep issues to gut bacteria. So do you and others in the field look at psychedelics as a secondary or tertiary option once cognitive behavioral therapy, say, is tried? Once getting your diet right is tried? Is that how you look at it?
It's a great question. I mean, I'll just share from what it's like to be in the trenches with working with serious mental illness with people for more than 2 decades. When someone's very depressed and they come in your office and sit down and the first thing you say to them is, hey, we need to change you need to stop eating fast food, or hey, you need to get your sneakers on and go run. It couldn't be the worst thing. I mean, nobody's in a position to make behavior changes until you give them some support and help them get their life moving forward. So if you think about this analogy, if we haven't worn it out yet, of the tow truck in the ditch, I like to tell people on the front end, like, we're going to get you feeling a little better with the psychedelic therapy such that we can make these big changes that you need to make. And it's going to be hard work afterward. But 90% of the healing that happens with psychedelic therapy is after the dosing session, which, it's different for people to think about hard work as part of the treatment versus, okay, I pop the pill and the pill does the work for me.
So I will admit I am a stoical sort. I'm mostly loath to use drugs if I don't have to. That's not the right stance for everyone, I acknowledge. But is there something broader going on here? The world, as we've talked about, is a hard place. Politics are hard. There's a lot of ambient anxiety, and for good reason. There is also suggestibility and a hunger for remedies, maybe not cures exactly, but therapies. And when those therapies, I'm just thinking, when those therapies overlap with what in another context would count as recreation or fun, might there be a risk of understating the downsides, a danger in selling the potential user on the ease, on the relief, when other interventions, including interventions that happen within your own mind, might in some cases be the better path?
Well, it's a great point. I mean, the thing is, as far as I'm concerned, there are no shortcuts to getting well. It's going to be hard work, no matter how you slice it. The thing is, this electrical pattern we were talking about in the brain previously, we call it the default mode network because it's what's happening in your brain in default, at default. So you're daydreaming. You're thinking about yourself, a self-referential thought. Who am I? What does this mean about me? Is this good for me? Is this bad for me? That kind of thinking gets completely disorganized and chaotic on the drug, which breaks down your sense of who you are and gives you an opportunity to consider different points of view or different ways to interpret reality. So that by itself can be incredibly helpful for people to have a different perspective for a period of time. It's not going to change your personality in the long run. I mean, it could make you more open, more flexible, but it's not going to fundamentally change Myq into you, for example.
Mm-hmm. I'm not adopting the Y in the name. That's what you're saying. Yeah. Anything, Myq, that you're hearing that makes you more intrigued or more reticent?
Yeah, definitely.
Which one?
Both. No, I'm absolutely more intrigued. And I want to share briefly one experience I had during an ayahuasca ceremony. And then I have a specific other question about a different substance.
Good.
So I feel like I also was like you, Myq, before I became enlightened and saw the light. No, truly, before I had smoked weed for the first time, which was encouraged by my, life partner at the time, who became my wife, who became my ex-wife. She was a musician. She was like, weed can do these things. I, at the time, was like, I don't want to, I like my brain. I don't want to change my brain. And then I tried it, and I didn't love it. And then I tried mushrooms, and I did love it.
Well, here's the thing. Like Myq, I've had several dozen ayahuasca ceremony experiences in South America. It's been a big benefit and healing in my life, but there's a huge difference between ceremonies with ayahuasca in the traditional way. And I have to say it that way because there's a lot of sort of neo-shamans, sort of backyard, part-time, weekend shaman people who are not
And I read
trained.
your bio. Are you a shaman, or do you just say you believe in shamanism?
I think shamanism is a valid format for understanding illness and healing. It's different from Western medicine, for sure. And it sort of hinges on disconnection being reconnected as a sort of theme in the healing process. But you're very much on your own in a traditional ceremony to sit with your own disturbance, to work through your own stuff. Even on a psychedelic, you can be telling yourself things that are actually not, they're distorted by your history, by your personality. And so the guide can challenge some of those distortions in a caring way and help you reflect on things and get a bigger perspective about your life. So it's quite different. The other thing is shamans don't have psychotherapy training or psychological training at all. And often they straight up discourage preparation or integration around the ceremony. There can be a view, which is really common in traditional environments, of the ceremony's the healing. You don't talk about it. You do your own work and come back in a month and drink some more medicine. I think that the North American neurosis, the condition that we're all in, and there's a spectrum, but the preparation and integration piece is key to make lasting change. In the ayahuasca ceremonies and communities that I've been a part of, it's common to see people come and go and come do another ceremony, but their life isn't really moving forward or changing much. And they might have a big insight and then I need to, change my such and such. And then you see him back in a month and you're like, hey, how'd that go with changing such and such? And it's like, what? I don't even remember telling you that. Well, that was a big insight from the last ceremony.
I was tripping balls, dude.
The other substance, I'm curious if you have knowledge about ibogaine, which I've heard is like an even more intense consciousness shifter.
Yeah, ibogaine is really promising. It's kind of the topic that's hot right now, you could say, in the psychedelic community. For a while, it was like 5-MeO DMTs, what everyone wants to talk about. Now it's ibogaine. Ibogaine is showing a lot of possibility with PTSD, also with traumatic brain injury. There was a Netflix series that I would recommend anybody go check out called In Waves and War that came out last fall that was followed special operations guys to Mexico to do ibogaine work. Really beautiful miniseries. I haven't used ibogaine personally, and I haven't prescribed it to anyone, but my understanding is more academic. It has some cardiac risks that have to be managed carefully. It can cause arrhythmias that can be serious during the session. It's also much longer. It's like a 48 to 72 hour experience. So I think it's going to be relatively difficult to mainstream into mental health care because the staffing of doing something intensive like that with medical supervision in 48 to 72 hours seems pretty difficult. So it might end up being an intervention. What I'm most excited about with ibogaine is actually opiate addiction. It seems to be incredibly powerful for people with that.
Okay, so let's go through the actual substances and when they might be approved. We've talked about ketamine. It's out there. We've talked about the flaws that it acts quickly and suddenly, but then maintenance is an issue. MDMA was not approved by the FDA. When might it be approved?
We think it could be a year or two. They may have to do another phase 3 study, so it's not clear when it would be approved.
Psilocybin?
Psilocybin, the news last week from Compass Pathways, which is a pharmaceutical company developing a pharmaceutical version, was positive, and it looks like they'll be able to apply for FDA review later this year.
Ibogaine?
Ibogaine is not even in phase 3 studies, so we're probably 2 or 3 years out, I would think, at least.
Toad licking? No, anything else? Anything else that we didn't talk about?
Let's be nice to the toads, man. Yeah. They haven't been handled well, in my opinion.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, so you're talking about 5-MeO-DMT, which is a toad venom that it can be expressed out of the pores that hold the poison in the back of the toad, in the Sonoran desert toad. And the kind of traditional way to work with that medicine is to express the venom out of their back through these pores and then send the toad on their way. But obviously that's a much more labor-intensive and time-consuming way to do it. So, in more recent times with the popularity of 5-MeO-DMT, these toads have been killed for their poison. And so they're endangered, actually. So it's a problem.
Damn, ending on a down note for the toads. Funny man Mike Kaplan, express your non-decidedly venomous form of comedy. Any last thoughts, sir?
I will say one thing that I'm glad, Dr. Derveer, you brought up. The fact that this particular substance, like that ibogaine, is useful in helping end addiction to drugs that are legal. And I think this speaks to a point that you made earlier, Mike. These same substances can be used to party and can be used to heal. Like with anything, it's good to learn about what we're putting into our bodies. I'm glad that there are people who are thoughtful, wise, and caring working on it. And so I'm optimistic for the future of this research. I've had the homeschooled version. I'd love to have, take the university course of psychedelic therapy.
Mike Kaplan there expressing optimism, which of course makes him a poor candidate for prescribing any of the things we've been talking about. No, I joke. Go to Myq Kaplan. He spells his name MYQ Kaplan.com, and there you will find his latest fantastic special, Rini. Mike, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Dr. Will Van Derveer is the co-founder of the Integrative Psychiatry Institute. He's out with a new book with Keith Kurlander, Psychedelic Therapy, a revolutionary approach to restoring your mental health and reclaiming your life, which, by the way, is exactly what we did here, maybe on a lesser scale. It took less time. Thank you so much, Dr. Van Derveer.
Thanks, Mike. It's been great being with you both.
It has been great, mind-expanding even. If you like what you heard today, please give us a rating and review. I've said that every show. I don't think anyone has. Be the first to go to Apple and give us a review on this version of How To. We do also need your questions. Do you need to make a great apology, even an adequate apology about a very tough subject? Our expert is standing by, or if you have any free-floating how-to questions of your own, describe it to us at thegist@MikePesca.com. Today, on The Gist, my daily show, it's part 2 with Mickey Bergman, a man who has a unique job. He has negotiated the release of hostages and political prisoners the world over. People like Paul Whelan, Brittany Griner, Trevor Reed, Elizabeth Surkov, who was my guest on The Gist last week. You will not want to miss this interview with Mickey Bergman. How To is produced by Jeff Craig and Corey Wara. Michelle Pesca puts the can-do in How To. Charles Duhigg created our show, but he had to leave to pursue this quixotic quest for reform within the psychiatric community.
I had a therapist who had the same first name as my mother, which I don't think should be allowed.
See, I blame the therapist for insisting on being called Dr. Mommy. I'm Mike Pesca, back every weekend answering your questions of How To.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience and their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's Libsyn, ads.com today.